Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago, and we are thrilled to have you here on this beautiful spring day. It's nice to be out of winter quarter and out of winter, we think. It's never quite sure here in Chicago. To be kicking off our spring quarter speaker series here at the Institute of Politics with this great program featuring Reggie Love in conversation with Elsie Granderson, who is one of our newest fellows here for the spring quarter. Elsie, of course, writes for ESPN and CNN, and we're thrilled to have them both with us tonight as part of our ongoing speaker series conversation. We also want to give a special shout out to our friends at the Seminary Co-op bookstore. You may have noticed that copies of Reggie's book, Power Forward, are for display and for sale out in the lobby, not just for display. And he'll be signing them after the conversation tonight. So a great opportunity for you to pick up a book and to connect further with Reggie after the conversation. I want to mention a couple of events coming up because we're just launching into our festivities for spring quarter. Next week we have several things related to the Chicago mayoral election and what's going on in local politics, including an election night watch party at the IOP on Tuesday night. Wednesday, we'll shift gears and turn our attention to the presidential campaign, where we will welcome former U.S. Senator Jim Webb and possible Democratic presidential candidate. He will be with us at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night. You can find out about all of the events next week and beyond by going to our website at politics.uchicago.edu. What we will be doing a bit later is going to you for questions, as is customary here. When we do, we ask that you keep your questions short and to the point so we can get to as many of you as possible. We'll ask that you raise your hand and we'll bring microphones over to you for that part of the conversation. We'll also try to give priority to students here where we can, and ask that none of you be shy about posing your questions to Reggie. We are videotaping tonight's event. You can also catch this and other series on our iTunes account at itunes.u. Wait, is it iTunes? Let me check my note on that. Is it itunes.u? I believe I'm sorry. It's iTunes, and you subscribe to UChicago IOP. So you can take notes on that. So let me stop there. And I certainly need to take notes on that. Let me stop there and turn this over to Blaine, who is a second year at the University of Chicago. He's very active with the IOP. Blaine is also a political science and Chinese major here at the university. He also is a member of the varsity basketball team here at the University of Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Blaine Crawford to get us started. Blaine?
Thank you, Steve. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Reggie Love. Reggie Love is a unique witness to history, whose introduction to Washington was working in junior Senator Barack Obama's mailroom as body man to Obama during his first presidential campaign. Love's job was to stay one step behind the candidate, but think and act 3 steps ahead during the typical 18-hour workday. As President Obama's personal aide during the momentous first term, Love sat yards from the Oval Office and often spent more time with the president than anyone else. While his experiences were unique, the lessons he learned during his tenure with the president are universal: persistence, responsibility, passion for a cause greater than yourself, in short, maturity. Now, are there any Duke basketball fans in the audience? In the house? Are any of you planning to watch Duke this weekend, in the upcoming NCAA Final Four? Well, in addition to being a public policy and political science major from Duke University, Reggie Love played both football and basketball and was power forward and captain on Duke's 2001 national champion basketball team. Today, Reggie Love is here to discuss his book titled Power Forward: My Presidential Education, where he chronicles his amazing journey and the lessons he's learned. Our discussion will be moderated by IOP fellow Elsie Granderson, whose wonderful work spans both ESPN and CNN. Thank you all for coming, and now without any further ado, may the discussion tip off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Blaine, Steve, Amin, IOP, all of you, Reggie, of course.
Well, thank you, guys.
Really looking forward to this conversation. As you know, your presence was of much conversation, particularly within the African American community, because we were trying to figure out who the heck you were.
Everyone thought I was Secret Service.
We did think you were Secret Service. Yes, we did. So before this conversation began, I read your book. It's very good. I encourage you all to pick up a copy. I'm not just saying it because he's here and he's bigger than me. There was a photo here that caught my eye, and I was like, this is going to be my first question. It's a picture of President Obama blocking Reggie Love's shot. And so my first question is this photoshopped?
Man, I wish I could say it was Photoshopped. That photo, the main reason why I put that photo in there was because we were in New York City. It's the week of the UN. He'd just come from the G20. It's such a long week. And if you look at the photo, I'm wearing like a pair of tennis shoes that aren't even like laced up. And so
Here you go.
And so he wanted to, he had a couple minutes. I want to decompress. We're going to shoot some hoops across the street. It's a little small gymnasium inside a church, right in Midtown, New York. And so he blocks a shot, but it's clearly a foul. Right? It's like clearly a foul.
In all fairness, there is some contact here.
There's a lot of. But look, it's like he's from Chicago. I know it's a physical game, and so there's a picture taken, and I don't know this at the time, but it finds its way up into the West Wing, and so the picture goes up next to sort of the Navy mess where everyone goes for lunch every day, and typically Pete Souza, who's the photographer, he would rotate all of the photos through like every 2 or 3 weeks. The photo stayed up for almost a year and like 3 months. And finally I said, look, I think it's great that, that you really are proud of this photo, but, I would love to get the same treatment that all the other photos here have gotten. But no, it's one of his better basketball moments, and a lot of people got to see it and have enjoyed it.
My favorite part is that while it is true your shoes are barely laced, he's wearing a pair of sweatpants and looks like a polo shirt tucked in. So it's
Oh man, a lot of people ask the question about the basketball and sweatpants. I think it's just a comfort thing, man. I don't know. I don't do it, but I know people who a lot of military guys that I play with have done it, and they always say that it's to help them like lose weight because they think that the extra layers will. But I don't know.
It's just water weight.
Exactly. Probably affects your crossover though, right?
So you went to Duke. You were part of the championship 2001 team. I happen to know Jay Williams, who was the Player of the Year, on that team,
Yeah.
Pretty well. As I've worked with Chris Duhon, and the thing that I found really interesting, also I think Shane Battier was on that team as well.
Yeah.
The thing that I found interesting reading your book was that you make note that, where you went to high school, you were one of very few minorities in this all-white world. And it was something that Jay had talked about to me personally as well, and it's something that Shane Battier, another top player on that team, also sort of straddled. And I looked and I was like, there were 3 African American men who all sort of felt they were straddling between a black world and a white world. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and did you guys talk about that amongst yourselves?
Yeah, it was, well, one, I think so I grew up in Charlotte, and I went to a very small private school called Providence Day. Probably 87 kids in our graduating class. And, I think there were maybe 2 African-American males and 5 African-Americans total in the graduating class, which it's not very representative of what sort of the makeup of what Charlotte or even the country looks like. But part of it is that it's an education that's different than you would get from your public schools. And so it was an opportunity for me to get college preparation, world-class college preparation where you have 100% of kids that get accepted into college. Now, at the same time, it was difficult for me because, like a lot of people paid $20,000 a year to send their kids there. My parents did not, nor could they afford to do it. So you do see so I mean, so one, there's just some barrier of entries, basic barriers of entry. So that creates sort of an imbalance of what sort of the demographics make up, and that, and that's part of the deal. But for me, it was hard because, you show up and, everyone's got these fancy cars, and after school, people are in these big fancy homes, and, and for me, that was something that was difficult. And even the kids that I played AAU with who didn't go to private school, they gave me a hard time for it. They thought that because I spent most of my time there, that I was, not as tough, I was soft, or, whatever you want to, or an Uncle Tom, or whatever you want to call it. And that was like hard for me growing up. But when I got to Duke, and look, Shane went to Detroit Country Day, and Shane's little brother Jeremy went to Detroit Country Day. He was my roommate for 2 years in college, and we talked about it a lot. But it was actually a good thing to happen in college because, there was, at least in the athletic world, there was a lot of diversity. You could have those conversations about how you felt or what you thought, and that was like a very comforting thing for me to finally be able to do, than to have to talk to like the same guy, Eric Stowe, who's still my friend today, but he was like the only other black guy that I would see on a regular basis in school. So it was nice to sort of have that, to have other guys have had that same experience, and for them to be in a place to talk with me about it. Now, I think, to be totally honest, I say it's a challenge, but the best thing that ever happened to me was the fact that I went to Providence Day. You go back and I look at my AAU basketball team, and we were a very good team. We finished in the top 10 nationally every year. We won our state every year. And I, by far, was not the most talented kid on the team, nor was I the tallest, nor was I the hardest working. But I was the guy who actually, was the most prepared for the SAT, had a very good GPA. So when colleges were out looking to recruit, I actually ended up being an easier candidate to recruit because I didn't have the same barriers of not having the scores or not having a GPA high enough for them to feel like I would be able to competently come in, matriculate into a university, and have success. And even when I got to Duke University, I was far more prepared than my counterparts who didn't go to private schools. Like, you look at Shane Battier. Shane was one of the highest performing student athletes that Duke's ever seen. He went to Detroit Country Day. I was not as academically successful as he was, but I felt pretty close. But I think a larger point to it, though, is that the education is key. The experiences, though not necessarily racially diverse, the experience of being there was a very powerful thing for me. And if you look at student athletes who've come through Duke and have done sort of the similar, went to a small private school, they've all gone on to do really impressive things after basketball because, they get an early preparation to be hungry, to be knowledge seekers, they form work habits that are work habits that are around being not only just an athlete but also a good student. But if you look at the list, not even Jason Williams and Shane Battier, but you've got guys like teammates like Matt Christensen. He just raised a $250 million fund in Boston. You got a guy, Ryan Callbeck, who started Circle Up, which is one of the largest crowdsourcing companies in the Bay Area. You got guys like Jay Billis and Grant Hill, who also is on TV. He's got a Mez Fund. Brian Davis and Christian Leitner. They redeveloped all of downtown Durham, North Carolina. I mean, it's really impressive what athletics in combination with a good academic background and sort of being in that culture of people who look to achieve more than just athletic success. It breeds a very interesting culture.
I just want to stop you one quick. Is it possible we can get a napkin that's a little warm? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got
All
one
right.
here.
Okay. All right. Great. Wanted you to be a little bit more comfortable there. Part of the reason why I brought that up was because early on, when President Obama, after he had announced his intent, then Senator Obama intentions to run, some of the criticisms, or at least questions within the black community was he black enough?
Yeah. It was.
Was that something, because of your experiences that we just talked earlier, that may have helped you in terms of being able to bond with him, understanding what he was dealing with?
You know, I write about this in one of the chapters, and it was actually really surprising to me because my assumption would have been, I was like, okay, well, this guy's African American. You know, there's no other African Americans running. So obviously, like, 1 + 1. All right. But, you know, it wasn't necessarily the case. And part of it, I think the big thing about it is that politics are local. People go with the things that they're comfortable with. You know, Bill Clinton had done so much for, you know, the middle class as a whole. You know, his presidency, you know, we've had one of the most flourishing economies that this country's ever seen during that administration. So I totally get it as to why people had that connection with Bill Clinton, you know, and he'd been in the African American community. He'd visit churches. He was friends with Al Sharpton and
He was on
Reverend
Arsenio
Jackson.
Hall.
Exactly, on Arsenio Hall, all these things. And look, you know, and at that point in time in 2007, I mean, not many people knew who Barack Obama was. I mean, you guys, if you're from Chicago, you guys know him. So, but if, you know, he hadn't organized in a community in New York. He hadn't visited any of the sort of the local pastors in the New Yorks and the Californias. And I think it took time to build those relationships and to get people to see that all the things that he'd done here in Chicago very much translated to him being just as black or blacker than anyone else out there running. But that had to be communicated. Now, I do think that, and I do believe that when a guy like Barack Hussein Obama says to a room of African Americans who may or may not be on the fence as to who they're going to support, he says, look, if I can go out here and be successful, it shows to your children and to your grandchildren that in this country that anything is possible. And I think the fact that I think even if he hadn't won, I think people would say, look, there isn't anything that's unachievable because you're brown or blue or red or straight or gay or whatever. I think it shows that, you know, if you do the work, if you do the preparation, and you put in the time, that anything's possible. And I think that it's a message of hope that I'm proud to have been a part of.
You wrote in your book that you thought you blew the interview for the job. Why do you think he hired you?
Well, look, I think, I think when I was interviewed, I didn't actually know I was interviewing for a job. I thought that I was just like looking for an internship. And Pete Rouse, who then was the chief of staff to Senator Obama, who also was chief of staff to Tom Daschle, he was chief of staff in the White House, senior advisor on both campaigns for President Obama. He was really the guy who kind of took a liking to me. I think part of it was that my affiliation with the sporting world. I think part of it was, there weren't a lot of other 22-year-old guys who had the Green Bay Packers and Dallas Cowboys on their resume. And he said to me that when he called the basketball office, and he says, hey, I'm Pete Rouse. I'm doing a reference check on Reggie Love. And he said he got to speak with Coach K. And what Coach K, and this is how he paraphrases it to me, he said that Coach K said that there was no job that was too small for Reggie. And that was the thing that, I think that was the reason why he took a chance on me after I had such a lousy interview. Yeah, I think that's probably, my sports background and I was, I was interested. I was interested in learning. I definitely, when I showed up there, I knew I didn't have all the answers. I knew I didn't know very much about the process, but kind of told him that I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn from someone that I admired and respected, and I thought would do, that would do an amazing job representing the country.
So you graduate from Duke University, one of the finest institutions in the country. You get hired to work for this senator. You move to one of the most expensive cities in the country, and you're making $28,000 a year. Help me.
Yeah, no trust fund either. I was lucky. So I spent a little bit of time playing football after college. So I was in Green Bay for a couple months, and then I was in Dallas with the Cowboys for about 8 months. So, and I didn't have a lot of student debt. I luckily got college. I got undergrad paid for. I paid every penny plus interest for grad school, but I didn't have any student loans, and so I could make the numbers work. And I worked part-time. When I wasn't working in the Senate office, I worked as a doorman at a bar. I bartended. I did whatever I had to do to make the numbers work.
I know you said, or at least Coach Kate said of you, that there was no job too small. Was there ever a period, though, in which you were just very frustrated with the decision that you have made? Because your colleagues have gone on to make a lot more money, and here you are. I think you said some crappy apartment with roaches and rats. Trying to make it work.
And Chris Duhon was like living at 900 North Kingsbury, like 2,000 square feet, new 760. Yeah, no. Look. I
mean, this is important because one of the things that is really important about a democracy is making sure that people are getting involved with public service for the right reasons, and it's not a money-making venture.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that is a very good point, and I think, well, one, I think the president did a very amazing thing while he was in office as a senator. He started what was called the Hope Fund, and the Hope Fund basically was very similar to IOP, except it was in DC, in which he came in, he put together programming, he invited diverse kids from all over the country to come to DC free of cost to learn and to train in the field of politics and help them to get jobs after they completed the program. And I think one of the biggest deterrents for people to come to work in the public service, especially in DC, is that you come out of undergrad, and if you owe 30, 50, 100,000 bucks, and you're only making 30 grand, and you got to service your note on your student loan, and your parents can't help you sort of get you into a break-even standpoint. It's a hard thing. You have to be really passionate to want to do it because the numbers are hard. But I do think that, like for me specifically, I was thinking about going to work in an investment bank after I got out of football versus going to DC. And my theory was, I'm young, I have no overhead, and I can figure out how to make it work when I'm young. It's probably harder to do when I'm older. And and I wanted to serve and to give back. And I think everyone here who is with the IOP, I think you will have a lot of opportunities and a lot of tough decisions to say, okay, do I want to go someplace where they're going to pay me 3 or 4 times the salary, or do I want to go someplace where I'm going to have impact? I would always warn you that it's much easier to scale up than it is to scale back. And I think what often happens that people at an early age say, I want to get my finances in order, and oftentimes, you become accustomed to a life and of certain expenses and certain things that, you almost move yourself out of the window of being able to participate in the political process, to go work on the Hill, or to go work for a think tank, or do any of those things that aren't necessarily lucrative. But it is a complicated problem, and I think a lot of it really starts with, trying to rein in what undergraduate school costs and what people have and how people pay that back over time. I think the president had a great initiative, which basically was the loan forgiveness program, which I think an amazing thing that he had instituted, which basically said if you come out of undergrad and you work in public service and you make your loan payments for 10 consecutive years, you get 100% loan forgiveness. And I think the payment structure is that you don't pay sort of your monthly payment isn't based off of what you owe, but it's based off of your capabilities to pay based off of what you make. And I think people have taken advantage of it, but that's one of the things that's out there that isn't talked about enough to get people to say, hey, look, this is something that could work for me, and I can make the numbers work on it.
Talk to us a little bit about the journey from not having a job that's too small to arguably having one of the biggest jobs you can possibly have.
Yeah, I mean, so though a big job, it included a lot of small things. So I guess to circle back on that, so when I was at Duke, and Blaine did a great job on the introduction, I was a captain and I was a part of the national championship team, but before any of those things ever happened, I actually was a walk-on. So I was a kid who was on football scholarship, and I loved the game of basketball so much that I was like willing to say, you know what, I'm going to continue to do all my football responsibilities, but I really want to play. And so on that team, you mentioned some guys like Shane Battier and Jason Williams, but there's actually a really long list of guys on that team. There are like 7 guys that went on to play in the NBA in that team. And there were like 9 McDonald's All-American. And I was not good enough to play in the NBA, and I was not a McDonald's All-American. But what I was good at doing is basically, whatever it is that needed to be done on that team, I was willing to do it because I wanted to be a part of the team. And being a part of the team was more valuable to me than, the box score numbers of points or rebounds or minutes played, or is my name bold and did I start, or, I cared less about that and more about playing on a team that was competitive and was winning. And so fast forward, I think that was actually one of the biggest parts of my job, was that, there's so many small elements that aren't like a sexy thing. It's not like the job's not like being J.J. Redick and you're coming off screens and hitting threes and, player of the year. It's more like you're the guy like setting the screen or diving on the floor after a loose ball, or you're the guy who's got to defend the best offensive player on the other team. And so when I got to DC, I was a staff assistant. So I don't know, you guys probably know sort of like what a congressional office looks like. There's the member of Congress, there's a chief of staff, there's a chief counsel, there's a communications director, speechwriter, director of scheduling, political director, like legislative correspondent, legislative assistant, executive assistant, staff assistant, then intern. And I was a staff assistant. And so when I got there, I mean, I was, the lowest on the totem pole. And one of the things that the thing that differentiated me, I believe, was one day P. Rouse calls in 4 staff assistants, into the senator's office. And we're all sitting there, and, there's this huge picture of Thurgood Marshall on the wall. There's Muhammad Ali's gloves. There's like all these just like very like powerful things. And you're in Senator Obama's office, and you think there's something really important about to happen. Like, I'm going to like write a piece of legislation. And Pete says to us, hey, look, we've got this huge problem. And I'm like, yes, problem. What is it? Like, everyone's like on the edge of their seats. And he goes, we have a problem in the mailroom. And we all kind of look at each other, and everyone continues to look at each other. And I kind of sheepishly sort of raised my hand. I said, look, I'm happy to help. And there was a 10,000 piece backlog of all this mail that he'd received that hadn't been answered. And I I basically got into the office early every day, stayed until I went to my part-time job every night, and like came up with a process to basically digitize our mailroom. So it was the first digitized mail process in the United States Senate, and we were able to use just like some words, word search functions, and a lot of different technologies to help plow through all this backlog of mail like really efficiently. So 2 months later, the backlog's gone, and Pete says to me, he's like, "You would have thought that I'd turn water into wine." And I said to him, "No, well, it's just like Excel and PDF and like an FTP site, and the Sergeant at Arms has this service that they'll scan anything, and so it's not like a sexy thing. No one, for the most part, that hasn't read my book doesn't even know this part of the story, of this part of the journey, but it really shows you that things that don't seem that cool or that big or seem very small, they make a very big impact on the people that you work with. And from that day forward, like Pete basically thought there wasn't anything I couldn't solve. So he was like, "There's a problem. Oh yeah, put Reggie on it. He'll handle it." So
when did you start working more closely with Senator Obama?
So I didn't work directly with. I probably maybe had 1 or 2 interactions with him before I became his personal aide. And I became sort of the traveling aide the day he announced that he was going to form an exploratory committee. And so I show up at the plane, and I had really, didn't know anything about presidential campaigns. I think the last presidential campaign that happened, I was like in high school. And so I essentially, I show up to the plane, and I kind of don't have a manual or no sort of here's what you do or break glass when this happens. It was just kind of, we got to, I think I was actually kind of a nuisance to him, right? Like, he had a lot of autonomy. He, for the most part, when he traveled by himself. And I'm kind of saying, "Hey, you need to turn right here, and then you need to go into there, and you've only got 15 minutes, and when you're done there, you're going to go to here." And I remember the first day, we were behind schedule, and I was like really stressed because someone on the staff was calling us like, "You're late. Where is he? All these people are waiting." And I'm kind of like, "Hey, sir, we gotta go." And I'm like, I may have even like.
Did you shove? You shoved Senator Obama? Wow.
And at the end of the day, we're in the car, and he says to me, he goes, "So I just want to get things straight here." He says, "I'm the candidate, and I'm like in control of what's going on. Like, you are," he said, "you're closer to my daughter's age than you are mine, and I'm going to need you to chill out." and look, and I think
you chilled.
Exactly, right? And I learned a lot about the process and about him specifically, and what the best ways were to for him to stay on schedule and to be as effective as possible without being as much of a nuisance.
You write in your book, going back before you were the nuisance, about answering the telephones and getting all these crazy callers and things like that. Looking back,
none of those calls were crazy, by the way.
I said they were crazy. Looking back, speaking of crazy, what would you tell us was the craziest interaction or period during your time with him once you were in the White House?
Oh man, crazy as in like good, or crazy like I can't believe this is happening right now?
Crazy as in whatever that word means to you.
Yeah, I think one of the strangest things was, or not strange, interesting things was, it was one of these nights, President Sarkozy and Carla Bruni were coming over to have dinner with the First Lady and the President. And when they show up, the president's son, who's like 11 years old, is with him. And, you know, it's like not on the schedule. He's like not in the manifest. And so, and I was like looking forward. I was like going to get some work done while he was like having a meal. And so the president kind of looks at me and he goes, you know, Reggie, why don't you, and it's Nicholas, why don't you show him around? So I'm literally touring around an 11-year-old who I've never met before, who is, and you know, he was a great kid, and I actually enjoyed spending the time with him, but it was just like really weird. And and after the dinner, President Sarkozy came down and he like shook my hand, he gave me a hug, and then from then on out, every time I would see President Sarkozy, he would like hug me. It would be at the G8 and he would say, Reggie, so good to see you. And I'm like carrying my bag, I'm trying to do my job. I'm like, oh, it's really, thank you, pleasure to see you. But I think that's still one of the weirdest things. It was like the children's bilateral at the White House. It was just like, yeah, but there's interesting things that happen every day, and that was one of the first things. So the guy who had my job for President Bush was actually a Duke alum, Jared Weinstein, and you know, one of the things that he told me, and he said, look, you know, like something amazing is going to happen every day, and sometimes it may be more than every day. And the thing that you've got to be prepared for is that you got to continue to move on to the next play. And so, you know, look, there's such a list of amazing interesting experiences. I remember the day that we had Mexico came for a state visit, and Beyonce was the headlining performer. And the president is walking over and to greet the guest, the performers. And before, and so they had a big tent. So everyone's in the White House, and in the South Lawn, there's a big tent where the actual dinner and performance is going to happen. And so in the interim, they got to move everyone all the way to the South Lawn, and Beyonce's going to go down to get ready, and the president was going to go sort of spend some time with President Calderon, and he says to me, and Jay-Z's with Beyonce, and Jay-Z's like waiting for Beyonce to go down in the nap, and he goes, well, could you go spend time with Jay-Z while all this stuff is like moving around? And I said, yeah, sure, great, I'd love to. I was like, please, you know, I'll stay as long as you need me to. But, you know, and so you're in the map room with Jay-Z talking about, all right, well, you know, what do you want to know, the history of the map room, or like, do you want to talk about your latest album, or you know, what do you think about the Nets?
There was a passage in your book, you know, talking about the president. It wasn't directly talking about the president in terms of his policy, but I thought there was an interesting correlation, so I just wanted to know your thoughts on it. Let's see. It's here where you say, the more time we spent in each other's company, the more I marveled at Obama's natural inquisitive nature. Often the significance of a question from him wouldn't become apparent to me until days or weeks later. He had an insatiable appetite for information. I would get emails at 3 a.m., questions he wanted me to follow up on. The man never took a day off. No detail was too small for him. He was never afraid of looking like he didn't have the answer, but he worked tirelessly to understand all positions, all sides of a position. And I would like to ask you, because one of the biggest criticisms of his administration, and of him in particular, is his leadership style. Mm-hmm. And that it's very deliberate. Some would even say, you know, slothful, if you will. They want him to respond quicker than what he does. And this passage kind of gives us a glimpse into that. Do you think his approach to leadership has been harmful in terms of how he wanted to approach his agenda?
Harmful? No, I mean, look, I think everyone's got different styles. And I think you've seen, and especially if you make the juxtaposition to sort of the last Republican regime, I mean...
Regime, interesting word.
Administration. I think, look, there definitely were some you know, if you don't stay the line with our party, you know, there will be consequences. I think I think that is like I don't think that is like really something that you can do in the Democratic Party, because we just look so, it's just more diverse. It's more issues. We're not just, you know, worried about, you know, social issues and taxes. You know, it's just and I think in order to get people to come up with a solution that everyone feels comfortable with, everyone has to feel like their voice has been heard. And if people haven't felt that way, they don't feel like they've been engaged, they don't feel like they've been heard, they'll be even less willing to budge or give or to negotiate on anything. And so, you know, I think one of the most powerful things that he would do, even within like his inner circle, is, and David has probably said this to you guys before, is that he would take the opinion of everyone in the room. I mean, and even in a scenario where maybe his mind is already made up, you know, you never know where a good idea will come from. And so I don't think it's soft to be inclusive, to bring as many ideas and people to a conversation or to to a negotiation. I think it's empowering. It's actually one of the more powerful things you can do. So people may think that he's not tough enough and he doesn't sort of make people, you know, walk the party line at all times. But, you know, if people aren't there on their free will, they're not going to give you their best work and their best effort anyway.
We're going to take questions now from you in the audience. We have 2 microphones that are up. We'll ask your hands go up, and we'll get the microphone over to you. So anybody has questions you have a hand up here in the middle. Love to take student questions as well, of course, so don't be shy about that. We'll get the microphone up over here. Other questions for Reggie? And I want to point out before we go to this question that some of you may have noticed that there's a $20 bill under LZ's seat. I don't know if you saw that. Some of you may have thought that accidentally slipped out, but LZ's actually really smooth. That's going to the person who asked the best question.
Yes.
Yes. It was very cool of you to do this.
Well, it's actually my non-verb saying straight cash, homie, but I like your...
Randy Marsh.
Absolutely.
I love that line.
Hello? Is this on? Okay. Hi, Elsie. Reggie, welcome to Chicago. My
Thanks
name
for having
is Ron Barnes. I go to school here. I can relate to your situation. I went to the lab school, which is a private school here at the University of Chicago campus. And when I would go back to the neighborhood, to the hood, my friends would ask me, well, where do you go to school? Because they didn't see me getting on the bus, you know, daily. So I would tell them, well, I go to school on the other side of town, which was a technical high school, because it was difficult to tell my peers and my friends that I went to a private school at that particular time. But later on in life, you reconcile those things out.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's a good idea, though. You were like, oh, I go to this technical school on the other side of town. You never heard of it. I should have thought of that.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, one of the things that disturbs me personally, though it's, you know, but I get tired of hearing people refer to the President of the United States as Obama. Now, that is his name, but in respect, they should refer to him as President Obama. That's what they do often in other situations. And it wouldn't be any big deal if it just happened infrequently, but it happens to news media, on TV, on ABC, I mean, all over the place. And personally, I just noticed that. But
and just in the interest of time, what's
yeah,
your
okay,
what's your
going
question about that?
Here's my question. It appears that when the President of the United States goes up, the Republican Party goes down. When he goes left, they go right. There's just total discord between their coming together on issues. Can you give some insight to us on what's in the underbelly of the political conflict that the president is having with the Congress?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no. Look, I don't think it's that complicated. I think Democrats have, we've had a very good run. I think Republicans their party is like a little split. I think there isn't, there are a lot of new members, and there are not a lot of sort of, bipartisan coalitions that you had, even 4 years ago. And so you just, you're seeing people who are saying, look, we don't want to go in whatever direction you're going, because we don't believe that. Even if we wanted to go that direction last week, if you now want to go that direction, we now want to go in a different direction. Look, I don't know what the strategy behind it, I don't know how you solve that. I think ultimately, all this stuff catches up with you. I mean, people will start to look to say, all right, well, what have you done? You've been a member for 2 years. What's your track record? What do you have to say for yourself of having me as a constituent sent you to represent me? And until people have to answer those questions, I don't think there will be no real incentive for them to change that strategy. Now, for you, it must be really frustrating to see it, not just as people who are from Chicago, but people who believe in government and believe that people in government should govern. But I think that if we as a country are active and involved and engaged, and we continue to have conversations with our friends and our neighbors and our relatives in other states, I think ultimately this sort of market imperfection will right itself. But and I don't think it's going to happen next week, but I appreciate the question.
We have a hand up back here.
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. I was just wondering, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Oh, man. I think the one thing that I learned from the president and I probably learned a little bit of this in college too, so two things. One, Coach K always used to say this. He said, there's no such thing as a dumb question, just dumb people who don't ask good questions. So don't show up on the court and not know which play to run. You should ask, and you shouldn't be embarrassed not knowing it. You should be embarrassed if you go out on the court and you stand in the wrong position, because I'm going to pull you out of the game. And I also think that that the president, he spent a lot of time in places that he's unfamiliar with, in situations that, you're in 80 counties in Iowa, you're in every county in New Hampshire, you're in all these places. Politics are different, people are different, and oftentimes you can't keep up with all the information that you need to. So you rely on other people. You rely on having to say, hey, look, here's something I don't know. Can you help me with this? When I was younger, I wanted to be the guy who knew everything. And if I didn't know everything, I was going to totally fake it. But I think the thing that I definitely wish that I would have done when I was younger was taking the time when I didn't know something to turn into it, to pivot and to pay more attention, to be more focused on it versus trying to just get through the moment.
We have a bunch of hands over here. We'll get a microphone too, but I want to go to the straight back. Yeah.
So when you were,
I can hear you.
when you were in Washington, a typical day once you were working in the White House, what time would you get there? What time would you go home? And did you actually have any social life on your own during those years?
I think trying to think. I think during the campaign, my social life was like a little bit better because, you know, you didn't have your own, there was no Air Force One. So like if you had an event at 7 o'clock in a city, you couldn't go get on a plane and go any other place. So you usually stayed the night. And that was always nice. I remember, Bonnie, we had some great nights where you could have like a nice fun dinner. During the White House, it was great because I got to go home every night, sleep in my own bed, you could use my kitchen. I could like actually like make myself a meal. But you didn't really, I mean, it varied all the time because, so for me, when the president has a movement, he's like, all right, Reggie, this is what I want to do. And if it's off the schedule, typically I was the person who was responsible for it. So, you know, like a typical work day, you know, the schedule that is printed, that's sort of out there, you know, that's pretty consistent, right? You know, he's going to get to the office around 8:30 or 9, and he's going to, you know, go home for dinner at 6:30, and, you know, if you're lucky, maybe, you know, there's an evening event that gets out at, you know, 8 or 9 or 10, and you're home by, you know, 9:30 to 9:30, 11 range. But then you've got like all the other things where like, you know, one night, you know, you're going to go visit, you know, troops in Bagram, and, you know, you're going to be in Afghanistan for 3 days. Like that's not even on the calendar. You don't even realize that you're doing it until like 3 or 4 days before. Or, you know, he decides he wants to go to his kid's basketball game on Saturday morning at like 8 a.m. So like you got to go to, you know, you've got to be there at, you know, 7 o'clock or whatever on you know, there's not a lot of consistency in the sense of you just kind of are always on call a bit. You know, you don't go into too deep of a sleep.
Is that why you left?
Oh, no. So I left. I mean, here's the thing. So I played 2 sports in college. I studied political science and public policy. I thought that, I was like, MBA from the best business school in the country, or maybe the second, depends on how you feel about Booth. I was like, I can totally do that and work at the White House for the president at the same time. Like, not a problem. And then, like after the first year, I didn't realize that UPenn had this thing called an LT, which is like the lowest 10%. And if you got a certain number of credits of those things, they kick you out and you can't come back. They don't give you your money back. So I'm like halfway through the program, and I've got, you know, I'm more than halfway to the number of LTs that you're allowed to get. And so I just said,
And
you know,
LTs would be?
lowest 10%.
Okay.
And
all right.
so, you know, you could get like a B, but if everyone else got A's, like you still got an LT. And so I just had to figure out a way to be more competitive to ensure that that first $90,000 that I'd spent on the first year didn't sort of get thrown away. And so I asked his advice. I said, you know, Mr. President, here is the situation. He says, you know, I told you that you shouldn't go to Wharton. And you know, and he said, but you know, I think that it makes sense for you to, you know, to handle your business and to, you know, to make sure that you see this part of your life through.
We've got a couple of questions here on this side. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. One of my questions is talking about your relationship with the president. When you're around someone that much and when you're working so closely with them, you see a lot of their strengths, but you also see a lot of their weaknesses. So for
No
you,
weaknesses.
No weaknesses. Well, that's going to make my question really difficult. But in your mind, what were or what was one of his major weaknesses, and how did you see him really try to reconcile that weakness or grow from it?
You know, I think one of the early challenges, I mean, I guess you can say that, you know, look, obviously he has grown a lot since 2007 to today. And, you know, I think, you know, there were the early criticisms that, you know, he was too professorial, you know, then kind of middle of the White House, he's like, you know, he's too cool, he's not mad enough, you know. But I think that's really more on, delivery of information, and it's more stylistic than it is, reason or principle. I think when he first got to the White House, he'd spent 2 years campaigning for president, and I think there were some things that clearly frustrated him, and he expressed those frustrations with people when folks would make sort of errors in an interview, or people who hadn't sort of gone through the ringers of a presidential campaign. I think I said to him, I said, you shouldn't hold people to the same expectations that you hold yourself, because you've done this for a long time, you're well trained, like everyone's just not going to be like as good as you. Now you should expect them to work to get better, but you can't sort of hold them to that standard, because they're just not gonna, because then you're gonna beat yourself up all the time, or beat them up, trying to get them to be as good as you are in a lot of these scenarios that they just aren't, really prepared. I mean, not that they're not prepared, but they're just not, they haven't gone through the same sort of preparation system.
We have hand in the far back left there, and then I'll come around, and you can bring the microphone up here on this. Oh, you're back there with them. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Kind of piggybacking on the question before last, I'm big on work-life balance. How do you think you even came to sort of a balance with that, or like, what were your methods of, I guess, kind of achieving a little bit of balance in the process of your very rigorous job in public service?
Yeah, I'm like still paying back like all the Christmases and Thanksgivings and weddings. And I've been out of the White House for almost 3 years. I mean, my list of OUs are still very, very long. But I think the thing that, for me, and I learned, I was very big on sort of making sure that I kind of stayed connected to people, even if I couldn't physically be there. So I was like very big on, if I were someplace, I would always like buy things, even if I thought they had no value, I didn't even want them. I would just say, you know what, hey, mom or cousin or girlfriend or whoever, I was here, was thinking about you, put it in the mail, send it to you. Or I was in Hawaii, and the president's there for Christmas. I found these pineapples and put them in a box and sent it home, right? Now, I mean, look, I don't think that's not like a substitution. And no, people, look, man, your people, your friends, your parents, your family, they want to see you, they want to spend time with you. But in the scenario where you can't, I think the little things that you can do to let them know that you are thinking about them, that you're bummed that you're not with them, I think it goes, it carries some weight and helps a little bit. My mom still like has like every note that like I wrote her during the campaign, so I think that's like really cute.
We'll have you bring your microphone up around to this side where there's a hand, and in the meantime, we'll come back here. Yeah.
Good evening, Reggie. Thanks for coming to Chicago. My name is Carl West, and I'm one of the individuals that when I first saw you, I wondered who you were. And once I realized you was a Secret Service, I Googled you, and then I forwarded your bio and photo to all of my 65,000 subscribers, and we all got a kick out of this wonderful brother carrying the coat of the president. We thought that was kind of cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Yes,
that, Carl.
We knew
man.
you had to be someone special, though, yeah. The question I have is, from where you sit, and when the book is written on President Obama, what do you think his legacy will be, and does he think about that? Thank you.
Oh, I mean, look, you're the first African-American president, and look, if things go really wrong under your watch, I think people will be extra critical of you, and I think he thinks that to some level. In terms of how history will remember him, I think history will be very kind to President Obama. I think when you look at, I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things I think that he's done, from saving the auto industry to navigating one of the greatest recessions since the Great Depression. I think those things are very monumental. But when you look at the Affordable Care Act as a whole, I think that is on par with the New Deal in my impression. And I think it'll be one of those things that our grandkids will be like, man, I don't know how my great grandfather ever went without the Affordable Care Act, right? So I think history will be very kind to him, and I think I think he thinks more about doing what he thinks right for the American people. And if you're always trying to do what's right for the American people, then the American people will always remember you well. And I think it drives in that direction more so than I really want this to be my legacy. But I appreciate the question, and thanks for tweeting out to all your followers that I'm not Secret Service. Secret Service is going to be really bummed. They've been claiming me.
Dylan, we have a couple of student hands in this area, so I'll have you come up by one of them. In the meantime, we'll go to
Just an
this woman here.
easy question, changing it up a little bit. Can Duke beat Kentucky?
See, me and LZ, we were just talking about this.
It's a really important question to ask, actually.
Look,
And I went to Notre Dame. So
sorry, man. I tell you, those last 3 possessions, those shots, I mean, look. Because, my theory is the best way to beat Kentucky is for Notre Dame or for Arizona to do it. Or Wisconsin. But Duke, I think we have to play a very good game to beat those guys. They're bigger than us. They have more depth than us. And, we'd have to shoot the ball well, rebound the ball very well, and defend them very, very well. And,
What's interesting, not to cut you off, but there's these two camps, right? There are people who still hate Duke, right?
Yeah.
They're going to root against you because you're Duke. But there are people who don't like Calipari and they don't like what's happening in Kentucky right now.
Yeah.
Whose hate's greater?
That's true. Well, he's got the guy. He recruits great players. How can you hate the guy, man? Though I think the age limit thing is where I think the problem is. If there weren't all these guys that should be in the league, then he wouldn't be able to recruit them. But I guess we also wouldn't have gotten Jabari or Okafor. So I guess we've benefited as well.
This woman here had her hand up for a while, so yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I grew up in North Carolina.
Great, what part?
In Raleigh.
Oh, nice.
I went to
Okay.
Wake Forest, but I grew up watching ACC basketball. And you've worked for 2 people who have very different leadership styles on screen, at least. I wanted to know if there are any similarities between how Coach K is as a leader versus President Obama.
Yeah. Well, I like this. I love this question, and I always like to preface the answer with that coaching Duke basketball is not a democracy. I think that when Coach K calls a play, you better believe everyone runs the play. No one's like, oh no, we want to run this play. In terms of leadership style, I think there are 2 big things that they both have that I admire, and I think is a very key element to leadership. I think the first thing is getting people to believe that being a part of a group is more powerful than being an individual, and that you can do really special things when you come together and work with people. When you look at Duke, and when you even look at the team that I played on, we had all these guys who were the best scorer, rebounder, shooter on the team that they played on. And and the unfortunate thing about the game of basketball is that everyone can't shoot on every possession. And you got to get people to buy into a culture and into a belief that this is you may not be the star, or you may not be the thing that you thought you were going to be, but you're going to be this other thing that's really, really important to this unit. And if you do that, we will all have success. And if we all have success, then you will individually have success. And I think that was the same thing that President Obama was able to do in the 2008 campaign, in which, he brought in a lot of people who hadn't participated in the political process historically. And he was able to get people to believe that there was something bigger and something better from being involved and being engaged. And I think that is, that's like a special thing. I don't think that, if you guys are teaching that here, I want to sign up for that course. And then I think the other thing is work ethic. I think the most impressive thing that I saw from those two guys was that they were always the hardest working person. They were up the latest, like watching film or writing speeches or doing whatever. Like, they just put everything, their heart and soul, into everything that they did. And it was something that was very apparent, and it was something that made it that much more easier for me and for everyone else on the team to work as hard and to put as much effort and as much passion into what they're doing. And so, I'm always certain that Coach K outworks any other coach that he's coaching against. I never question that with one iota, and I think the same about the president, that if you ever would have said to him that Hillary Clinton started today at 7:30 at a fundraiser, he'd be like, okay, what are we doing at 5?
We'll take two last questions here, right next to you and then right in front.
Hi, Reggie. My question is, what are your future plans for continuing your legacy of public service, and do those plans include potentially running for office someday?
Public service and my legacy in public service, I've never even thought of it that way. Future plans as a whole, I'm about to be 33 this month. And I couldn't have written the first 32 years, I couldn't even have dreamed them up. So, I don't I don't have my 12-year plan that I'm reviewing every 5 years that says, hey, this is what I'm going to do. But I think as a whole, I want to work with people, and I want to be a part of something and be a part of teams that, that are having impact, that are doing things that are special and new and disruptive. In terms of running for office at another point, or running for office, I mean, I don't think it's something that I would particularly do, just because, I know what it takes to actually put together a successful campaign, and it's a lot of work. And so, not to say that I wouldn't ever do it. I mean, I think being involved and being engaged and is a really important thing. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. And I don't think the only way to do it is by being the principal or the candidate or the member. I think there are a lot of other ways. And right now, I'm on the advisory board for Organizing for America. I've helped a couple of friends like Patrick Murphy and others raise money, and I've done events with them and all that kind of stuff. And I will always continue to do that. And I think if there's a Democrat that's in office that said, hey, we really need you to work on this or do this, I mean, I would look at it as an honor to have the opportunity to serve my country again.
I think it's fitting that we end our final question here tonight with Blaine.
My question has to do a little bit with the work ethic that you talked about, not work ethic, but the toll that the work has on someone. So having spent so much time with President Obama, can you talk a little bit about having seen him as a senator and then having seen him as a president, and really the day-to-day work or toll that stress level has kind of been placed on him? Can you talk a little bit about how he's changed I mean, we see the gray hair now. But can you talk a little bit how he just changed kind of, I mean, emotionally, his leadership style, how it's changed because of that stress that he's had over this such a long period of time, or really a short period of time?
I think that's a good question. I've definitely seen, there was like a definitive change sort of in the decision-making process between being like a candidate for president and being president, right? Like, you just have like more risk. Like, everything you say and do like has impact on, the whole entire world. Whereas like when you're a candidate, you kind of can. There's not as much sort of pressure around that. In terms of emotionally, I think he still addresses issues the same way that he did, and it's like he is very deliberate. Takes in every data point that he can find, listens to people who agree with him and don't agree with him, before he comes up with what he thinks is sort of the best solution. And I don't think that some people think that it's like too detached of an approach, but I think you're never going to get what I believe is like sort of the knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, I was really mad, so I did this, or I was really infuriated, so I did Y or Z. Even though I think at times he's definitely frustrated or furious or mad, I just don't think that will ever be, the way that he works through his decision-making process. And in terms of just sort of the stress as a whole, yeah, man, it's a lot of stress, man. Like, I think it's like a frustrating thing when like everything that comes to your desk is like a problem. I remember like the first year, it was like auto crisis, financial crisis, pirates, floods, North Korea. I mean, and it's just like, it's exhausting. But I think that's the job that you sign up for. And to be honest, I couldn't imagine us right now having someone else leading us through what I think have been some very tough challenges for our country. But I think that's a very good question.
The book is called Power Forward: From the Basketball Court to the White House. It's the work of Reggie Love. Please join me in giving him a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Everyone, sit down for just a second. We're going to let Reggie move over here to the book signing table for those who would like to purchase books. We encourage you to do so. So, Reggie, why don't you go ahead and make your way over there, if you don't mind. And I also want to have everyone give a warm round of applause to LZ Granderson and a warm welcome to the University of Chicago campus. And we're so thrilled to have both of you here and thrilled to have LZ with us for the quarter. While Reggie makes his way over there, I want to give you a quick second to do a pitch on your fellow seminar, which is an amazing series and one that I think many of you will want to participate in. Do you mind?
Oh, no, not at all. Sit here and brag about myself. So, again, thank you for having me on campus. I'm really excited to be a part of the program. When I first discovered the fellowship, I was so ecstatic, and I was really checking my email quite regularly to see whether or not it could be accepted or not, because I thought it was so. I mean, David Axelrod at the University of Chicago. I mean, what else do you want, right? So the seminars that I've compiled together looks at the intersection of sports, politics, and social issues. You got a little bit of the flavor with the conversation with Reggie about how my mind sort of worked and what my life's work has been, which is sort of looking at that sweet spot about how these three seemingly different entities all come together to really kind of shape the way our lives are going. I'm very happy that the people that I've invited have agreed to come to campus for the most part. I've seen flight schedules been arranged and hotels booked, so I'm thrilled they're actually going to show up. Some of the people who will come to campus, Hall of Famer, or soon to be Hall of Famer, hopefully, Eddie George, NFL and Heisman Trophy winner. My good friend Hannah Storm, who I worked with tennis for ESPN. Pedro Gomez, who actually hopefully will come to campus Wednesday. We're still working out his travel, to talk about what a normalized relationship with Cuba will mean to Major League Baseball. We're going to be talking about stadium funding, whether or not it's worth cities actually hosting large events like the Super Bowl or the Olympics. And so we're going to talk about scores and highlights and athletes, but it's going to come through a different sort of lens, and I think one that is really exciting, and again, it's been my life's work, so I'm excited to share.
Yeah, Elsie, thank you so much. We encourage all of you to join us Wednesday nights or Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 at the IOP for that. Thank you all so much for being here, and we wish you a pleasant good evening.